There's a steak sitting in the bottom of my refrigerator right now that cost me about $6 per pound. It's sitting in a glass dish underneath a dark liquid that cost me maybe 40 cents to make. It went in last night. In a few hours, I'm going to pull it out, dry it completely, and put it over a hot fire. And when I put it on the table, the man sitting across from me is going to ask the same question he has asked me for years. Where did you find $100 ribeye on a Tuesday? Except this isn't a $100 ribeye, and I'm going to show you exactly why it doesn't have to be. My name is Frank Miller. I've been cutting meat for 31 years. I've spent most of my life behind a butcher block, breaking down beef and watching customers spend far more money than they needed to. And after all those years, there's one thing I've learned. The most expensive cut isn't always the best value. In fact, some of the best steaks in the meat case are the ones people walk right past. Before I show you the method, you need to understand something about beef. Tenderness is not the same thing as quality. Tenderness is largely about location. A ribeye and a sirloin come from the same animal, same feed, same water, same pasture. There isn't some special cow that produces ribeye. The difference is what those muscles did while the animal was alive. The ribeye sits along the back, where the muscle does very little work. Because it stays relatively relaxed, the fibers are finer and fat can settle between them. That's marbling. The sirloin comes from a harder working part of the animal. Those muscles move the animal around all day, so the fibers become thicker and tighter with stronger connective tissue. That's what makes the meat tougher. Not worse, not lower quality. It simply means the muscle had a job. And that is where the opportunity is. Because while everyone is fighting over the expensive 8% of the animal, the other cuts are sitting there at a fraction of the price. One of my favorite examples is the chuck eye. The chuck eye is essentially part of the same muscle system as the ribeye, continuing forward into the shoulder. The animal doesn't know where the expensive cut ends and the cheap cut begins. The price tag does. That's why some people call chuck eye the poor man's ribeye. Then there's flat iron. For years, people barely sold it because of the connective tissue running through the middle. But once butchers figured out how to separate that seam properly, they discovered an extremely tender steak. Then you have Denver steak, flank, skirt, and top sirloin. Different cuts, different characteristics. But all of them can become dramatically better when you understand what you're doing. And that brings me to the trick I learned from an old butcher named Walt. Walt had been cutting meat long before I started. He didn't talk about fancy marinades. He didn't have a shelf full of cooking books. But every night he had a cold pot sitting on the back counter. Whatever lean piece of beef he was taking home went into that pot overnight. He called it putting it to bed. Take it out in the morning, dry it, cook it. That was it. For years we knew it worked without knowing exactly why. Eventually, I figured out what was in that pot. Coffee. Strong black coffee. And that's the part most people get wrong. This isn't a coffee rub. It isn't a coffee crust. It's a coffee soak. And coffee works differently from the aggressive marinades people usually reach for. Vinegar and lemon juice are highly acidic. They can break down the outer proteins of meat very quickly. Leave a steak sitting in strong acid too long, and the outside can become pale, gray, soft, and unpleasant. Pineapple and papaya can be even more aggressive because they contain protein-breaking enzymes. Coffee is much gentler, it's mildly acidic, so the steak can sit in it for hours without destroying the surface. It works slowly, and that's exactly what we want. Now, if you want to learn more practical techniques like this and get better at making simple ingredients work harder for you, I've also put together a book that goes deeper into these kinds of methods. I made it for people who want practical information they can actually use without needing expensive equipment or complicated recipes. If that sounds useful to you, you can find the book through the link in the description. Get the book here at ubiquitous-hati-netlify.app/question mark UTM_source=chatgpt.com. Now back to the steak. There's another reason coffee works well here. Dark roasted coffee contains compounds created during the roasting process that help encourage deeper browning when the steak hits a hot surface. That means you can develop a darker, more flavorful crust. And if you add salt to the coffee, you get another benefit. Salt doesn't just sit on the surface. It gradually moves into the meat and helps it retain moisture during cooking. But let me correct one myth right now. A marinade does not travel all the way through a steak. It doesn't reach the center. Most of the marinade's effect happens near the surface. And that's okay, because that outer layer is where your first bite happens. If the outside is properly seasoned, browned, and tender, your entire impression of the steak changes. So here's the recipe. Brew your coffee about twice as strong as you normally drink it. Use a dark roast. Keep it plain, no vanilla, no caramel, no flavored coffee. Then chill it completely. For every 2 cups of coffee, add 1 tablespoon of kosher salt. Stir until the salt dissolves. Put your steak into a glass dish or bag and cover it with the coffee mixture. 4 hours is the minimum. 8 to 12 hours is where I prefer it. And don't push it beyond 24 hours. When you take the steak out, dry it extremely well. Both sides, the edges too. This part matters more than people realize. Wet meat doesn't sear. Wet meat steams. And steam gives you a gray surface instead of the crust you want. After drying it, put it uncovered on a rack in the refrigerator for another 45 minutes. That cold, dry air pulls even more moisture from the surface. Then season it lightly. Coarse black pepper, a little salt if needed, garlic if you want it. But remember, the coffee already contains salt. Now we get to the part that closes the gap between a lean steak and a heavily marbled one. A marinade can soften muscle, but it cannot create marbling. It cannot put fat inside a sirloin. So you add the fat yourself. Ask your butcher for beef fat trim. Most butcher shops have plenty of it. Take it home, put it in a pan over very low heat, and let it slowly melt. Strain the liquid. That's beef tallow. And tallow is one of the oldest ways to add rich beef flavor back into lean meat. During the final couple of minutes of cooking, spoon a little tallow over the steak. That's it. You can't turn sirloin into ribeye, but you can give a lean steak something it naturally lacks. Now let's cook it. I use a 2-zone fire. All the coals on one side, nothing on the other. Start the steak on the cooler side with the lid closed. Bring the temperature up slowly. That's important because blasting a tough working muscle with extreme heat can cause it to contract and squeeze out moisture. Slow heat gives you more control. When the center reaches around 105 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit, move it directly over the coals. Sear both sides hard. That's where the crust develops. Use a thermometer if you have one. You don't need an expensive model. For medium rare, pull the steak around 130 to 135 degrees. It will continue cooking while it rests. Let it sit for about 10 minutes. And don't wrap it tightly in foil. That traps steam and can ruin the crust you just spent all that time creating. Then comes the final step. Slice against the grain. Look at the steak. Find the direction the muscle fibers are running. Then put your knife across those lines. Not along them. When you cut against the grain, you shorten those long muscle fibers. That makes every bite easier to chew. And with sirloin, pay attention because the grain can change direction across the steak. You may need to rotate the meat as you cut. Thin slices against the grain every time. So let's run through the entire method one more time. Strong black coffee. 1 tablespoon of kosher salt for every 2 cups. Soak the steak for 8 to 12 hours. Dry it completely. Leave it uncovered in the refrigerator for 45 minutes. Use a 2-zone fire. Cook slowly first. Sear hard at the end. Add tallow during the final 2 minutes. Rest for 10 minutes. Then slice against the grain. And now let's talk about the part nobody can argue with, the price. A sirloin can cost around $6 a pound. The coffee costs roughly 40 cents. The salt costs almost nothing. And if your butcher gives you the beef fat trim, the tallow can cost you practically nothing. So you can make an impressive steak dinner for a fraction of what you'd pay at a steakhouse. I'm not going to tell you that this magically turns sirloin into ribeye. It doesn't. Ribeye is still ribeye. But the gap between a cheaper working cut and an expensive steak is much smaller than the price difference suggests. And the best part? Technique is free. You don't need a special machine. You don't need an expensive marinade. You don't need some secret packet from the grocery store. You need the right cut, the right process, and enough patience to let it work. So next time you're standing in front of the meat case, don't automatically reach for the most expensive package. Look at the chuck eye, look at the flat iron, look at Denver steak, look at sirloin. Because the best bargain in the meat case may be the cut everyone else ignored. And once you understand how to treat working muscle properly, you may never look at the cheap end of the meat case the same way again. Buy the working muscle, cook it properly, slice it correctly, and let technique do the expensive part.